Hello everyone and welcome to the 20th. Have we got? Hello everyone and welcome to the 20th. I'm just getting lots of background noise. Okay, I think that's sorted now. Hello everyone and welcome to the 20th seminar in our Healthy Active Cities Sustainable Transport Futures series. Today we'll be talking about the rise of the e-bike uses and impacts. I just want to say that we're using a platform that's quite new to us today. So if we have any technical issues like we just had, we'll try and overcome them. You are all watching through YouTube, so you should be able to ask questions on YouTube, and our speakers will be able to see the questions and answer those. So please do put those into that chat as we go along. So we'll have three speakers today. We've got Chris Leakey from Manchester Bikes. We have Patrick Rerat from University of Lausanne and Ian Baxter from Transport for Greater Manchester. Each speaker will speak for kind of 15 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So again, please put your questions into the chat. So first I'd like to introduce Chris Leakey from Manchester Bikes. Manchester Bikes is a bike shop and hire facility that specialises in cargo and family cycles, and they're now running the Manchester and Salford e-cargo bike library on behalf of the council. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Harry. Welcome, everyone. Harry, can you go back to the start? There we go. Fantastic. Thank you. So yeah, I'm Chris from Manchester Bikes. We've also been known as Bambino Biking and Manchester Bike Hire in the past, but we consolidated all of that into one name called Manchester Bikes to make it easier. If you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So e-bikes feature so much in what we do now, and it was a little bit tricky to identify all of the aspects that we did. So we just focused it on a few areas that we can talk about today. As a business in general, though, our focus is on utility, cargo and family cycling, and we specialize in essentially finding solutions for people to do that. And our strap line now is more ways to cycle, and I think that the e-bike is one of those ways. In terms of what we offer as a company, we've got a hire department, so we do hire to individuals, private fleets, and then public hire. We do sales, so we've got a whole mix of different kinds of bicycles, everything from a non-electric standard bike to a folding bike to an electric bike, electric cargo bike. So it's a huge variety. We've got a full repair department, and again, we've had to adapt and change so that our mechanics can repair e-bikes. In fact, all of our staff today are on a training course to update their current skills. And events as well. So we do different events around Manchester primarily, just to kind of show the kinds of cycling that people can do. And again, there's been a big focus on e-bikes since they've become more popular. Okay, the next slide, please. So yeah, the four kind of sections that I wanted to talk about today was just making it easy. So this, I guess, focus around cargo bikes and parenting. Some information about our Try It e-bike library and hire scheme with NHS trusts and the local universities. Carguru, which is a public bike hire scheme, and then the Manchester and Salford e-cargo bike libraries that have recently launched. If I could have the next slide, please. So making it easy. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is my wife and daughter, and this particular ride, my wife was just literally blown away and amazed. And she said, "I wish cycling was this easy every day, all the time, because I would do it all the time." And it really struck a chord with me that the electrification of this bicycle just made it such a simple and enjoyable means of transport. And it didn't mean that it was hard On the bike here, you can see my daughter. There's another bike thrown into the pannier bag on this cargo bike, and a load of lunch and things that we went out for a day's ride, and it wasn't a hard thing. My wife's not a particularly big person, so she's not like myself, who's quite big and strong. So it's easier for me, and it was just such a revelation for her just to be able to hop on the bike and get out to places without much hassle. And then the other side is the capacity, and cargo biking in particular, which is something that we focus on. And even though I say that, I find it a little bit easier because I'm a bigger guy, as my kids have got older, I have found that there are days where I just think, oh, I should just go in the car because I've got, a lot of stuff to take. But the electrification of the cargo bike, again, it just removed all those barriers and it removed all those excuses. So, if I thought, I'm a bit tired, there wasn't really a reason to take the car anymore, because the bike was there and it was easy. You've got different support levels, and I could choose. Well, I'm extra tired today, I'll get the most help, or I want to put in a little bit more work today, and I'll take a little bit less. So really, this showed me that the barriers that were there for cargo biking, in particular, were being removed. It was much more accessible, and we've seen that massively now. Within the shop, I can't remember the last time we sold a non-electric cargo bike. Everyone's realizing that this is something that makes their lives easier. Within this as well, we saw a big shift, I guess, over the last couple of years. And this was, again, people that had thought about getting a bike, or and particularly a cargo bike, and they were worried that it wasn't going to work, because it was going to be too hard, and this was stopping them from reducing from a family of 2 cars, or even to go car free. And the electric cargo bike, when most people tried it, were like, this is it, this is what we need in order to sort of reduce our carbon footprint, which tended to be the main driver from our customers. If I could have the next slide. Thank you. So yeah, the libraries and the private hire fleets, as we kind of call them with the university. So this started in at the start of the pandemic, when the Salford Hospital, who we have a good relationship with anyway, so that we need a way for our staff to get to work safely. We'd actually run out of hire bikes because we'd loaned them all out to different people, and so we couldn't give any more bikes out or hire any more bikes out. So we came up with a new service, and completely designed it specifically for the hospital. We got a fleet of 15 e-bikes, and the way that the scheme worked was that the staff got 1 month of free hire, and there was no cost to them whatsoever. All the insurance and everything was covered. And then this gave them essentially a risk-free way to try it, to see whether it was a good way for them to get to work. And if it worked for them, then they could go on to essentially a subsidized higher cost. And the hope really was here that this gave all the staff an opportunity to try out a bike, and then they could then go on to purchase those bicycles through the university bike to work scheme if they wanted to. The scheme has developed quite a lot over the last couple of years. One of the main things that we found, and we were surprised about, was that people wanted a bigger variety. It wasn't just about getting to work and having the cheapest e-bike. Some people were like, oh, I would like a mountain bike because I want to use this on the weekends as well as just getting to work. Or some people said, I want something with a few more features because I'm riding on rocky paths, or the roads aren't amazing around with me. So as we've had more experience with the scheme, we've adapted, and we've now increased the range of bicycles within each of these fleets, so that they are giving everybody the opportunity to try a whole range of different kinds of bikes. The big benefit that everyone's really seen with this is that it's essentially offering more people different ways to commute into work, so that people aren't necessarily reliant on having to take the car. And from a pricing perspective, we've also priced this so that it's essentially the equivalent of a bus pass, on the cheapest bicycle. So it's quite accessible for most people as well. Okay, the next slide, please. Carguru. This is I think it's the second e-cargo bike sharing platform in the UK. We were just beaten by one in Hackney. But again, Carguru was set up because the founders wanted to take their family out on a bicycle, and didn't want to get there all hot and sweaty and tired. So Carguru was essentially born from that. And also the ownership side of things. So these bikes, they have a home location. You can walk up to the bike, and with the use of an app, you can hire the bike, and you just pay for the time that you use. It's billed by the minute, so if you only use it for half an hour, you're billed for half an hour. We have a fleet of 25 of these bikes across Manchester now, which is part of a funded trial between Carguru, ourselves, and Transport for Greater Manchester. And it's giving people, again, different options to get places. If these bikes were non-electric, I don't think they would have the same level of usage, and I don't think they would be as accessible. The feedback has been, I guess, beyond our expectations. Within the first week of launching, particularly in the area of Chiltern, which is one of our sort of residential areas, the amount of positive comments we got was amazing, and we were so pleased and happy to see that the local community were really valuing having this as another means of transport within their communities. Okay, if I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so then this is the latest one to launch, the Manchester and Salford e-cargo bike library. We work with Manchester and Salford Council to secure some funding from the Energy Saving Trust, which is part of a Department for Transport funding for e-cargo bikes. So the library essentially has given everyone within Manchester and Salford, and essentially the whole of Greater Manchester, we haven't restricted it to just people in those particular areas, access to a wide range of different types of cargo bike. The idea behind the library is it essentially gives people a low risk opportunity for people to try these different modes of transport. Again, prior to having all these electric cargo bikes, there wasn't a huge range, and I think the main reason behind that was that it was hard for somebody to load up a bicycle and then, with a week's worth of shopping, some tools to get for work, even large volume items like bread deliveries. When you add up lots of loaves of bread, it still weighs something, and it was just hard work for people. So this made it much more accessible. And so now we've got this fleet of bicycles that people can book through our website. The cost again is subsidized, so it's available to as many people as possible. What we're hoping with this particular library is that we will see essentially 4 different outcomes. One is that, and this is important because people don't always think about it, is that actually the cargo bike isn't the right solution for what people need, and a van or a car is a better alternative. And that's okay, because a cargo bike or an e-bike isn't going to replace every single journey, and that's important to recognize, but it can replace a lot of them. The second thing is that that users may find is that this is great, it's exactly what we need, and we're going to be able to replace car journeys or van journeys with a cargo bike. it could be that they recognise that this is something that they like, but they don't want to do it themselves. So this is where they might employ another organisation to do local bike deliveries. We've seen the rise of a number of local bike delivery organisations that started as a result of the pandemic. We've been working very closely with one of them, Children Bike Deliveries, and again, the use of the e-cargo bikes helped them deliver food to people that were in need during the pandemic, and that continues on to today. And the fourth possibility for this is that cargo bike might be really useful for that organisation, but they don't need it all the time. So they can hire it on an ad hoc basis from a day at a time to up to a month at a time. So this is ideal if you've got one-off events or you need it for a week for a particular event that you're doing. So again, this is another way essentially of introducing to people that aren't quite sure how it could work, how it can work, giving people the opportunity to try it at very low risk, either with no cost or low cost. And essentially, it removes all of the, not all of them, but a lot of the barriers that would have been there in the first place. And I think that's a combination of having the electrification and the load capacity to do with the cargo bikes. And then, yeah, so the last bit I want to mention, and this is again about the barriers. So we are now expanding some of these operations with a pilot project, which is going to look at smart locks. So we're doing this with the Salford Hospital, and this will look at bringing some of the fleet bicycles and the e-bicycles directly onto the site. And the plan is, if everything works with the trail, that people will be able to hire those bicycles with an app on site. So if you, for example, were finishing your shift late, or you'd missed a bus or there was no more transport, you'd be able to go and get one of these bicycles and ride home. And there will be a range of non-electric and electric bicycles. So again, if you're tired at the end of your shift, that doesn't matter because you've got that support to get you home in hopefully a quick and efficient way. So that's it from me. A short introduction to a variety of things that we're doing with electric bikes.
Thanks very much, Chris. That was really interesting. And we've got lots of questions coming in on the chat, so we'll do those in a question and answer session at the end. If anyone is having problems with asking questions on YouTube, you can ask questions on our Twitter as well. If you use the hashtag ActiveCitiesUOS, then we'll find those, or you can tag in our Twitter account. So our next speaker is Patrick Rurat from the University of Lausanne. Patrick is a professor in geographies of mobility and urban planning, so he'll be talking about his research on e-bikes today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and give me the opportunity to present some of the research we are carrying at the University of Lausanne. So I'm going to speak about the rise of the e-bike in the case of Switzerland. And to start with, I will give some elements of context. So the next slide, please. In 2020, more than 170,000 e-bikes, new e-bikes, were sold in Switzerland. To give you an idea, Switzerland is about 3 times the population of Great Manchester. It's more than 1/3 of the sales of new e-bikes. And if you see on the figure, it's 100 times more than in 2005. So a huge increase in the sales of e-bikes. If you want to compare, in 2020, less than 20,000 e-cars were sold. When I speak of e-bikes in this presentation, I refer to bikes with an electric assistant that require muscular power. So I'm not speaking about strictly electric bikes. One specificity of Switzerland is the importance of what we call the speed e-bikes. 15% of the sales are speed e-bikes, that e-bikes with an assistant up to 45 kilometers per hour. That's due to some specific regulation in Switzerland that are quite different from the rest of Europe. But in my presentation, both kinds of e-bikes are aggregated. So next slide, please. But our research question was, how does the e-bike extend the practice of cycling? And I'm going to present some results from 2 research projects. The first one was a questionnaire survey that we did with the participants in the Bike to Work action. The Bike to Work action is organized every year in Switzerland in the months of May and June, and people in teams of 4 commit to cycle as much as they can for their commuting trips. So we have quite a lot of people taking part in this action. We sent them a long questionnaire, and almost a third of them answered the survey, and we got quite a huge sample of 14,000 bike commuters. These people are employed people. That means they are mainly aged between 25 and 65. And most of them are regular cyclists. They commute by bike very often, or at least regularly. To give you also an idea about Switzerland, the modal share of cycling is 7%. It means that on average, 7% of the trips are done by bike in the country. And in this project, we wanted to understand the practice of cycling. And we saw cycling as a system of velo mobility. I'm not going too much into details, but we addressed the uses of the bike, profile of users, characteristics of the trips made by bike. We addressed the cycling potential of individuals. Do they have access to bikes? What kind of bikes? What are their skills in terms of cycling, motivations, barrier, images related to cycling? And then we analyze as well the hosting potential of spaces, how a space is suitable for cycling, and we label that bikeability. And so I'm going to give you some results about the differences between e-bike users and traditional cyclists, let's say so, on these dimensions. So next slide, please. So in the Bike to Work action, a great majority, 83% of the participants used a mechanical bike, and 16% used an e-bike. And then 1% used either the cargo bike, folding bike, or a bike sharing scheme. So I'm leaving the folding bike and bike sharing scheme and cargo bikes as well. We're about to start a big survey on cargo bikes in Switzerland, but I'm going to focus on the rather traditional bike with or without electric assistance. So if we have a look at the profile and the differences in profile, that would be my next slide, please. In terms of demographic profile, several differences are identified. There is another representation of e-bike users among people aged more than 30. That's quite expected. We know that e-bike users are older than average. But what is interesting as well, and we could notice that as in other research, is that the average age of e-bike users has been decreasing. And you can see here in a sample, a fourth of the e-bike users are aged less than 40. Then women Women tend to be overrepresented among e-bike users, and other research we carried showed that they have become a majority among people who buy an e-bike. And then another representation as well of couples with children that refers to the age structure, but also the electric assistant, it was said just before, but makes it easier to have a cargo bike, but also to have a child seat or to have a carriage. In terms of socioeconomic status, results are not so clear because we have a slight overrepresentation both of the highest incomes and of the lowest incomes. It means that the cargo bikes can either replace maybe a car or a motorized two-wheeler, or it can be an additional means of transportation. Next slide, please. Then about the characteristics of the commuting trips. Again, something that is expected is that e-bike users use their bike or commute over greater distances. You can see that only a third of them commute or need less than 30 minutes from home to work. So some important, let's say, distances. E-bike users usually use the e-bikes for the whole trip. We have more intermodality. It's a mix between bike and public transport among the users of a mechanical bike. In terms of spaces, e-biking is more a suburban and rural practice than mechanical cycling. That may be explained by the distances, but there is also a problem that we could identify in cities, in the most dense areas. That's the lack of dedicated parking space. And if you have a mechanical bike, maybe a cheap bike, that's not a problem. But if you have an e-bike, which is much more expensive, you may need a safe storage. Then the next slide, please. We ask about the criteria, the factors that motivate people to bike commuting. And people had to say, oh, do you agree that this factor is important for you when you decide to commute by bike? And on the whole, we can say that the practice of e-cycling and mechanical cycling are very, very similar in terms of motivation. For example, there is no difference regarding the opportunity to do exercise. That's the most important factors for both groups. Almost everyone says, okay, that plays a role in my decision to commute by bike. No differences either in terms of respect for the environment, that's the fourth criteria. The embodied experience of the commute is higher among e-bike users. You can see the pleasure, referring to the feeling, to the landscapes. Also another criteria, which is to take one's mind off things, to disconnect from work. It's a little bit higher among e-bike users. And the biggest difference refers to time saving, which is much less important for e-bikers. And actually, these small differences, they are not huge differences, just a few points of percentage. Actually, they're not really related to the electric assistance, but they are mainly explained by the fact that e-bike users are more likely to live in suburban areas, rural areas, to have children, and therefore they are more motorized. So maybe in their answers, they had more in mind the car that they could use to commute than the regular bike, which explains why exercise environment is at the same level. Next slide, please. So what I show you just before, that's motivations. So of course, motivations are positive. It's what moves people to do something. But then we asked questions about the experience of commuting. And things appear in a less positive way and shows that cycling may be quite challenging in Switzerland, at least in some cities or in some regions. About 15% of the people we interviewed say that they did not feel safe on their commuting route. And you may say, okay, 15%, that's not that much. 85% say that feeling safe. But actually in this sample, we have only employed people. So we don't have children, we don't have teenagers, elderly people. We don't have people who don't dare to take their bike to commute. And we have also people who have adopted tactics, like avoiding rush hours, avoiding some routes or some roundabouts, choosing some alternative route in residential areas. So still, I think that we have a problem of safety with the existing population of bike commuters. Then 1/3 of these commuters do not feel respected by other road users. And the majority of them, between 70-75%, say that crossroads are not planned for cyclists, cycleways are not continuous on their route. And there are some differences, not very much, not very important, between e-bikers and conventional cyclists or mechanical cyclists. E-bikers tend to be more critical, and that's interesting because they are more motorized than the others. They are more likely to understand the motorist's point of view, but they don't feel that a little bit less safe than the other cyclists. And then, next slide, please. A second research project I wanted to present today. We did a questionnaire survey again and interviews, this time in Lausanne, in the city of Lausanne. It's a hilly city with a low modal share, 2%. Whole Switzerland is 7%. And the survey and the questionnaires were focused on the purchasers of an e-bike. And we wanted to know, we wanted to understand the adoption of the e-bike. When do people buy an e-bike and why? And that's part of a PhD by Dimitri Marinchek, which will be defended in a few weeks' time. So next slide, please. We wanted to understand the cycling trajectories of the people who buy an e-bike. The cycling trajectories is the practices, the image, the experience of cycling along the life course. And we have a first kind of trajectory, that's the restorative trajectory. That's people who learn to cycle in their youth, their childhood, in their youth. They cycled at some times of their life, mainly in the youth. They stopped cycling, at least utility cycling, for a few years, sometimes a few decades, and they buy an e-bike to restart cycling. So that's a way to cycle again. And the electric assistance makes the return to cycling easier, despite maybe the fitness condition, distances, or gradient. Main motivations for these people: health, physical activity, and also the will to reduce car use. Then we have a second trajectory, that's resilient trajectories. These people are cyclists, utility cyclists. They often use the bike to commute, to go shopping, to go to other destinations. And to buy an e-bike is a way to avoid a modal shift towards maybe a public transport or the car or a motorized two-wheeler. So it's really a way to maintain cycling. Why? Because these people have experienced changes. For example, a new home location, new work location, childbirth, and the need to carry children, aging, for example. So what is important, I think, with these two trajectories is to say that to develop cycling or developing cycling is not only about recruiting new cyclists, but it's also about retaining existing cyclists. And then next slide, a few figures about modal practices and modal shift. That we are still in Lausanne. And what you can see is that 80% of the people who bought an e-bike use it several times a week, at least. 42% almost every day. In the second table, you can see the changes in the mobility practices. And quite a lot of people mention changes, like 61% use less public transport than before. Half of them use less the car, and 46% of them use less the mechanical bike. So it means also that the e-bike is an important mode of transport, and it competes with all the other modes. Interestingly as well, 8% say that they use the mechanical bike more than before since having bought an e-bike. So it's also a way, the combination with a mechanical bike is still something that we should study. And my last slide with the messages. So the e-bike enables the extension of the practice of cycling in terms of population groups, spaces, cycling trajectories. E-cycling and cycling are very similar in terms of motivations, barriers, sensitiveness to infrastructures. The biggest difference, I haven't spoken about it, but it's the ability to repair, as the e-bike is more complex, technologically speaking. The e-bike is usually used very regularly, compete with the other modes, and could become a key component of the transitions towards a low-carbon mobility. And in my very last slide, you have some references if you want to know more. The first one is free access, and the other ones you can contact me, and I would be glad to send it to you. Thank you for your attention.
Very much, Patrick. That was great. I think that it probably resonated a lot with the UK context as well, but that difference with fast e-bikes as well, which we don't legally have, is possibly something someone could reflect on in the questions and compare the two circumstances would be interesting. So next up in our speakers, we've got Ian Baxter from Transport for Greater Manchester. Ian will be talking about the Greater Manchester Cycle Hire Scheme, which came in November 2021 and started in Salford and expanded to Manchester now. So over to you, Ian.
Hi there. So I'm Ian Baxter. I work for TFGM. I'm the cycle hire manager. And I've been asked to present some sort of stats on usage around the scheme since we launched. I think a key point is, maybe move on to the first slide actually, is that it's still early days. We've got 225 bikes at the moment around Manchester, and we'll be moving up to 1,200 this summer. So it's still early days, low numbers of bikes, and I think, you know, there's a big caveat sort of with all these numbers is not to draw too many conclusions yet, but we can see some interesting statistics. So this first slide, I appreciate the scale is very small on there, but that, you know, maybe the individual numbers aren't really what is important here. As you can see, there's lots of ups and downs in the numbers of rides per day since we launched. The main correlation we can find with these numbers is weather related, and the big troughs in usage are days of heavy rain or even snow, and there's a clear sort of correlation between the rain and how people cycle, which we would expect. On average, we see approximately 17% less rides on a rainy day. So it doesn't mean to say that people don't ride when it rains, because clearly in Manchester, I don't think anybody would ride ever if we didn't ride in the rain. So that's one thing to point out there. We had some peaks. Interestingly, you can see one almost in the middle there on the 1st of January. I think that was related to people doing their sort of New Year's resolution bits, and on the last day of January as well. So I don't know whether that was people just ticking it off their list at the end of the month as well. And then we had a peak a few days ago, which was the highest rides in one day, which was 396 rides in one day. So these are the overall stats. I appreciate we are here to talk about e-bikes. You can see the trend of e-bikes across the bottom there, and all-time journeys and the distance travelled. So if we could possibly move on to the next slide. So here we've got the stats in relation to the rides per bike per day on the left-hand side, which I know is a key metric around the world in terms of, you know, how successful a cycle hire scheme is. We're still early days, like I said, with low volumes of bikes, but we are hitting 2 rides per bike per day on the e-bikes and 1.2 on the standard bikes. You'd expect to see twice as many rides on the e-bikes, so there's no great surprise there. But the fact that we are getting, you know, in the region of 2 and in the region of 1 across the 2 bikes is pretty good, really, as a, you know, a starting point. We're in the middle of the winter as well. And I think the average journey statistic on the right is also relatively interesting in the context of the scheme, that we have a small scheme, so the radius or the zone that we have, you can't really travel that far, but people are. We've got evidence of people taking bikes for a ride rather than actually going to a destination, which is great. And then across the bottom there, you've got the ride split across the 3 main zones. So maybe just to introduce this a little bit more to people who don't know what's going on at the moment. The bulk of the bikes, probably about 85% of them, are down Oxford Road. So that's the bulk of our scheme. And then there's a split across Salford Union, Media City, with the rest of the bikes. We've done this as the introduction, really, targeting student areas of Manchester. We are seeing cyclists crossing from one zone, well, from zone to zone, which is very good. We weren't sure whether that would happen or whether they would just be staying within their zones. And then this summer, with the introduction of the rest of the bikes and getting up to 1,500 bikes, all these zones will be joined up together, forming the full scheme. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So this one here, I appreciate the scale of this is very, very small for a lot of people, but this is the league table of stations. So we've got data and stats on which stations are performing the best, which ones have more e-bike rides or standard bike rides. I've done a sort there on e-bikes rides, so you can see the Oxford Road, Hathersage Road station is the most popular, both for standard bikes and e-bikes. If anybody wants any more information on any of these stats, please do let me know, because I appreciate it's probably not very easy to see it on the screen. If we could move on to the next slide. So this one is basically showing where people are cycling from the most popular station. And you can see that a lot of people are going to the Fallowfield campus. And again, there's a sort of a split between the bikes and e-bikes there. And down the bottom, you can start seeing some of the Salford stations and Media City across there. You know, low numbers, but people are going across. And these stats, are from the 28th of February to the 8th of March. I kind of did a snapshot over the last sort of nearly 2 weeks of data, just to try and kind of concentrate the information, really. And if we move on to the next slide. This shows the top on the left-hand side, the longest journeys that were made in this period. And you can see that you have to move down the longest journeys to get to your first e-bike ride. The longest journey in that period was 14.9 kilometers, nearly 15 kilometers. And if you look at the scale of the scheme, that's a long ride for somebody to take, and that was on a standard push bike. And then the longest e-bike ride was 11.2 kilometers. So it's not an obvious correlation, even when you go down the list, that the bikes are the ones that are traveling the furthest. There seems to be a pretty good sort of spread across both types of bikes. And then the table on the right is rides basically categorized in terms of their the length of the journey, from the most popular station. So the bulk of the journeys are 2 kilometers or less across the top there. But you've still got, a few that are, between 4 and 10 kilometers from that station. And then if we could move on to the next slide, this is sort of our performance on a rolling monthly basis. And the main statistic that I was getting out of this was that we had the same number of rides in month 3 and month 4, which is January and February. In bold across there, you can see 7,300 in January and 7,323 in February. But if you drop down to the lower section of that table, you can see that there was an increase in rainy days that month of 100%. So there were 100% more rainy days in February, but we still got the same number of rides. So there's a sort of, we can see an uplift in users, we can see an uplift in rides. The weather does factor into this. And we've had a very good start to March, which isn't in this table yet, where we're performing above. I think we're nearly 10% above where we were last month, which I'm kind of putting down to slightly better weather. And that's my last slide. So if anybody's got any questions, I think we were going to do them all at the end.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, I think we're going to do a question and answer now. So Graham can bring all of the speakers back up onto the screen. And then I'll go through some of the questions that we have. So I'll start with Chris. Chris, someone asked, based on the pictures, it looks like the library is mostly turn bikes. Can you speak about the choice? They're great bikes, but also expensive. Oh, Chris, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, not all of the bicycles have arrived. The Turn GSD is one of the most common bicycles in the makeup of the library, mainly because it's the most accessible bike out of them all. But we've got bikes from Urban Arrow, we've got Reese and Muller, XCYC, Raleigh. So there's quite a range there, and we've got the Carguru trailers as well.
Thank you. And for Patrick, someone asks, could you let us know more about the survey you mentioned with 14,000 participants? When did you collect this data?
Data were collected in September 2016. So it was a few months after the Bike to Work action, so that we could measure the effects of this action. Because about 10% of the participants were new utility cyclists, and we wanted to know the more or less long-term effect.
That's great, thank you. And for, oh, sorry, Patrick.
Yeah, sorry, and maybe for the other survey, that was 2018, and the interview in 2019.
Right, and for Ian, speakers were wondering about the demographics. So someone asked, do you know the split of e-bikes between residents and non-residents? And someone else asked, do you have data on age and demographics of users?
We don't yet. Obviously, from a GDPR point of view, we can't automatically gather that information. So part of the whole scheme is there is a monitoring and evaluation plan that we have. And we have certain targets for hitting demographics and how we go about that and promote the usage. So at the moment we don't, but it is on our plan to do that. So most of the monitoring and evaluation will be done as of this summer when we have the full scheme launch. So there'll be a lot more stats to follow when we get to that point.
Great, thank you. A question I think that can go to all speakers is, are the speakers satisfied with the current e-bike regulations? Do the rules regarding speed and power need to be changed? I think what could be good is if Chris and Patrick could each introduce the legislation of e-bikes, because there is the difference between the UK and Switzerland, would be really helpful. Patrick, if you wanted to go first.
Mm-hmm. I think that the main difference refers to speed e-bikes. In Switzerland, to ride a speed e-bike, well, you need a helmet. The helmet is compulsory, which is not the case for the other kinds of bikes or e-bikes. You need a driving license, whatever the age. But I think the main difference is that people riding a speed e-bike must in Switzerland use cycle lanes and cycleways. And I think that's the opposite in the rest of Europe. And but it raises some issues as it becomes popular. But for me, the problem is not really in terms of regulation. That's the lack of infrastructures. And the e-bike is rising. The bike in general is rising, and its infrastructures are not really good.
And Chris?
Yeah, this is it's a hot topic. If I start off with the speed e-bikes, so you can get them in the UK. They're not illegal, but you have to be careful where you use them. So we can't use them on cycle paths, and they have to be used essentially where a car or a motorbike can go. They couldn't go on the motorway. So you've got restrictions. The same conditions apply. You have to wear a motorbike approved helmet, and you have to have the appropriate level of insurance and the right type of license. You can't do it without one. It is something that we are looking at as a bit of a project this year. I think that they do potentially have a use case. And so one of the examples that I give is somebody's got a very long commute, maybe over 20 kilometers or something like that. Then potentially that could be a really good option for people to get from A to B other than taking a car, or particularly if there's a low level of public transport. So the challenges are that in the UK with that particular speed e-bike is that we don't have all of the conditions kind of easily set. And it's been a while since we've sort of delved into it, and it's something that we're going to pick up again this year. But one of the conditions was that there isn't a way to essentially have an MOT, which is what would be needed if once the bicycle has a registration number plate, which is one of the other things that would be needed. So yeah, it's a great area and something that I think needs development, but it needs to be done without, I guess, impacting the standard e-bikes. And there's been a lot of questioning over whether the speed limit cut out. So for those that don't know, an electric bike will give you assistance essentially to 15.5 miles an hour, and then the motor will stop giving you support. The call has been to have that increased to say 20 miles an hour or more. And there are quite a few people that are buying kind of conversion kits to change this. We're very much against going against what the regulations are, because a lot of work has been done to get e-bikes to be seen as bicycles, where you don't need number plates, helmets, insurance, so that they're as accessible as another type of bicycle. And there's a big risk that electric bicycles could end up being something like a car or a motorbike, and you need lots of things in order to access that, and that is a barrier, and we don't want to create a barrier to cycling. We want to make it as accessible as possible.
Classic microphone. Did you have something to add, Patrick or
Yes,
Ian?
Just a few figures, because we studied also the users of speed e-bikes, and interestingly, there is like 75% of them are male. So there is a difference of users between kind of slow e-bikes and speed e-bikes. They are younger, and they commute over long distances, like 20, 30, 40 kilometers. And so there is a debate about this. Is the regulation strict enough or not? But I think it may play a role in the kind of ecosystem to reduce car dependency. Maybe we focus a little bit on the risks, on accident, on the speed, but it has also some great potential.
That's great. And Ian, did you have anything to add?
I think it would be more the sort of anecdotal side of cycling and e-bikes and the perception. And I think we've got lots more challenges with getting people cycling. And I think to increase the speed at this stage is probably not the best thing to do. It's certainly not going to reassure anybody who is doubting, you know, whether it's a good idea to have one or not, or whether it's a good idea to see one cycling down the road or not. So I'd rather that question be asked later and we focus on, you know, getting people on bikes and reassuring people that they are safe.
Another point that I just wanted to follow up with you, Chris, is have you noticed about the location of people who are buying e-bikes? I know, Patrick, that you said that a lot of e-bike users are suburban or rural, or living in suburban or rural areas. And I wondered what you noticed, Chris, about people purchasing or using e-bikes.
Yeah, I'd say that most of our people sort of live in a city or, you know, a highly populated environment. We have less rural users, but it's difficult because we're based, you know, within sort of Manchester and Salford. The majority of our customers are in those spaces, so I can't. It's difficult to me to do a direct comparison. If our shop was in a more rural location, we might have more rural customers. But I guess sort of broadly speaking, and this is sort of anecdotally as well, I think that it's easier to cycle in general within the sort of an urban environment. There tends to be better cycle infrastructure. Not to say that it's always good cycle infrastructure, but better than a rural situation. But then you do get the flip side was in a rural situation, an electric bike may make that cycling more accessible again because those distances are effectively shrunk because you're not having to put as much effort in, or it becomes a little bit easier with the electric bike.
That's great, thank you. A question for Ian is, most bike shares that have ever existed went bust because the economics are marginal and they need a very high utilization rate. Will TFDM be publishing economics as has happened for some in the States?
Yes, we're quite open to sharing information. You know, we went out to tender for a fully managed service with a provider, which is what we've got from Beryl. I think we all know about cycle hire schemes and the pros and cons and how to get them to work. They are costly, but the benefits are colossal. Really, to, you know, the sort of well-being and you know the promoting cities and making them more accessible. All those points are very difficult to put numbers on, but you know, I think we're all aware of those. So yeah, no, very keen to share information and be transparent, and you know, really promote that these bikes are for the people of Manchester, people visiting Manchester, and they are part of the community, and we need to look after them together. Really, that's what I want to focus on.
Yeah. Okay, and then a question that can be for all of the panelists is cost a barrier to helping people access e-bikes, especially those who would benefit most? And I think we can draw in another question in terms of private use of e-bikes, especially cargo bikes, in terms of storage as well, because that, of course, is another cost in itself. So if I start with Patrick.
It may be a barrier. I think it's clearly the case for cargo bikes, because people maybe they don't know yet maybe the potential of the e-bike or cargo bike. And it depends also on how, not only the real cost, but how the cost is perceived. Of course, it's more expensive than a regular bike, but how do you evaluate the cost? Do you compare with a yearly season ticket of the public transport? Can you give away a second car or the first card of the household? And that so the cost is not something that is clear or objective. It has to refer to something, and this something is important.
That's great. And Chris?
Yeah, I'll address the cost one first, and then there was a storage question as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd like to iterate the last comments there that the way I like to talk, particularly about cargo bikes, is people say, "Oh, it's an expensive bike," and it's like, well, yeah, it's expensive compared to £100 bike from a department store, but it can be a cheap transport solution, and I think that's really important to emphasize to people that they, if you look at the cost over the lifespan, then this can be a really cheap way to get about. Obviously, there's the upfront cost, which can be a barrier because not everyone's got access to those upfront costs. In order to improve accessibility from both businesses and consumers, we have introduced essentially like finance schemes, which allow people to spread the cost, so that we're trying to make it as accessible as possible. There has been the talk of subsidized programs from the government. I know that that's happened in France already, and hopefully at some point that it will come to the UK. Yeah, I think that sums that up. In terms of the security and the space, this yeah, again, it's a big topic. I'll try and summarize it briefly. I think the first thing is that if you haven't got any space at all, then it's working with your local council and seeing what is available. We've seen bike hangers, particularly in Salford. There's good examples of bike hangers being installed, so that people that don't have any kind of garden or garage can still store their bicycles. And I think that this is something that we will see more of. And it's like, well, people can park their car on the road. Why can't they park their cargo bike or bike? And this is just about reimagining the uses of space. Then if you take it back a step, so somebody might have some front garden storage, and we see this, I guess, this is anecdotally again based on sort of observations from social media, particularly in London, that people are installing ground anchors in their front gardens and then making small kind of bike sheds. And this is better than just leaving the bike in the open, for sure. And I think that as long as people have got the right level of security on that, like they've got a decent bike lock, not a cheap one, then the risks are reduced. You can't reduce the risk entirely, and that's where I guess having insurance is important. So that yeah, if the worst is to happen, then you're still covered. Then the last thing is that I know this is an ongoing process globally or nationally, I would say, and this is the reduction of e-bike theft in general, or bike theft in general. And the Bicycle Association that we are members of is doing some work now on an industry level to try and look at ways that essentially bike crime can be reduced. And there's a number of different ways that could look. So hopefully with a combination of these things, it should make it less attractive for people to steal these bicycles. But what I always say to everybody is, when they're coming to buy a bicycle from us, is that work out how many locks and the type of locks you want, get the appropriate level of insurance, and then accept that that you've done all you can do, and then enjoy your bicycle. Otherwise, there's no point in having it.
That's great, thank you. And I think a point that Patrick made is that in terms of the cost, it's more than that, economic cost. And I think things like the cycle library and being able to hire e-bikes prior to buying them really demonstrates how they could be used, and actually that they are potentially an option instead of a car. I wonder if you want to comment, Ian, about the difference in prices between e-bikes and bikes within the cycle hire scheme and the impact of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think to answer the question and then come on to that, really, I think anything can be a barrier, really. And I think it's the point that Patrick made really was that it's what you define the barrier to be, I suppose, really. And if something, you're comparing the price of something to the price of something else, then yes, you're going to say that that is what the barrier is, and that is why you don't do it. I think from a cycle hire point of view, you know, it's almost like you're putting them on a platform really to promote the scheme, because you've got access to e-bikes on the pavement there, and you don't have that capital investment. You don't have to worry about storage. You don't have to worry about theft. You don't have to worry about maintenance. So if that is a barrier to you, then cycle hire is an answer to that problem. In terms of the scheme in Manchester, at the moment, all the bikes are on a pay-as-you-go tariff. So the push bikes are 50 pence to unlock, and then 5 pence per minute after that. And the e-bikes are £1 to unlock and 10 pence per minute after that. So they're twice as expensive. One of the main reasons we've done that is that it's a good, easy way for people to understand how the scheme works. You don't have to commit, you don't have to pay for a subscription, there's no monthly fee. And we're kind of promoting short journeys because the zones are relatively small. So from an economical point of view, it seemed like the right thing to do. We are doing work on modelling different tariffs and trying to work out what the best thing will be moving forwards. And that will likely happen once we get into the full scheme this summer and beyond. But the tariffs don't seem to be getting in the way of people using either bikes, really. And I think that's, it's been a really good start to the scheme.
Great, thank you. So another question that we can pose to all of you is, some UK train operators are now banning e-bikes on their systems, including folding e-bikes, due to their batteries and fire risks. What are your thoughts on this? Chris, do you want to go first?
Yeah, that's a new one to me, actually. I hadn't heard that up until now. I know that from our perspective, transporting batteries that aren't in bicycles, from a shipping perspective, is seen as a higher risk. When the batteries are within the equipment, so within the bicycles, it's a lower risk. So I guess the same principles would apply here. So if you were to take the battery out of the bicycle, it's of a higher risk. I think yeah, I'm almost flummoxed that that's actually happened. And yeah, it's an interesting problem, and I can see the risk, but also you don't want to change, you don't want it to be a barrier. I don't want to sort of say one thing or another, really. I guess that from our perspective, one thing that we have looked at is that we tend to buy recognized branded names where we've got a traceability, so that we've got a better track record in terms of safety, rather than something where we don't know the origin, and there's a higher risk of potentially something going wrong because it's not been made with the same standards.
And Patrick, is there any similarities in Switzerland, or?
No, I knew it was forbidden on planes, but I didn't know about trains. No, it's not forbidden. Of course, it's more difficult to put on the train because it's heavier, but there is no other.
Someone says in the chat that by that logic, they should also ban phones and laptops on trains. So moving on to another question for all of you. Is there still a view that riding an e-bike is cheating? And if there is that view, how do we challenge it? Ian, do you want to go first? You smiled, so.
Well, I've kind of been on that journey in my own head, really. I remember when e-bikes were introduced and I'd be cycling up a hill, mountain biking, and someone would overtake me, and then I'd realise they were on an e-bike, and my gut reaction was they're cheating. That's because I was riding along in a sort of virtual race with that person, I suppose, in my own head. Since then, I've radically changed my mind. I've been out cycling and seeing people with their children, where the kids are on e-bikes and the parents are on a standard push bike, and they're able to basically do the same ride together. I've seen couples together, I've seen groups of people with different riding abilities, and they're all able to go out and ride together. I've seen people out on bikes that probably wouldn't have been on a bike if it hadn't been for an e-bike. So I think in my own mind, for what it's worth, I'm putting all that together, and I'm thinking that's got to be a good thing. That, you know, you sort of, the conclusion from all of that in my head, that is that it's a good thing. It's getting people out and about. That's my take.
That's great, thank you. And Patrick, is that a common perception in Switzerland?
Yes, I think it's something that we can find quite often, maybe not quite often, but regularly, that there is this image of cheating when someone rides an e-bike. I think a way to address that, if someone rides 5 kilometers, it's better to ride it with a bike than with an e-bike, if you think of physical effort. But the question is often the e-bike or something else than the mechanical bike. So the e-bike is still active mobility. It brings a lot of benefits to the health, and it's still better than all the other modes. So we shouldn't forget that. And maybe also riding a bike is a leisure, is getting from A to B in a way we like it. It doesn't have to be a sport or a competition.
And Chris?
Yeah, I think most of the comments there have been covered. And I kind of went on the same journey as well. When I knew the e-bikes first came out, I was like, oh, why do we need it? But now that I've seen that it reduces barriers to people, and it increases that modal shift, so that, the way I explain it is that if you have a choice between driving a car somewhere, and then you would never ride a conventional or non-electric bicycle, but you would ride an e-bike, I think that's a positive thing, because there's the health benefits and then there's the environmental benefits. And then on an e-bike, there's different levels of support, so you can still make that ride really challenging if you want to. So I think it's generally just being comfortable with what you're doing and not really worrying about what people think.
That's great, thank you, Chris. So we've got lots of questions for people specifically, so I'll go around and do one of each of these. Chris, one for you is, where do you find the funding to run these different schemes that you're doing?
I'll try and go through in order. So the schemes with the hospitals and universities, so they essentially buy that from us, that scheme, and we've got different pricing structures for it, and it's then part subsidized, I guess, by the higher income, so that we also received. But most of that particular higher scheme, it doesn't, it's not like a high earner for us. If anything, it kind of runs more or less at a break-even point. And for us, it's more about encouraging people to cycle more. And then for us, we hope that then people will buy the bicycles. For the Carguru project, this has been funded by Interreg, and it's part of a bigger eHubs project, which people can look up if they wanted to. And then for the cargo bike libraries, the Department of Transport has basically had an e-cargo bike funding pots of money, and we helped Manchester and Salford Council apply for that money to set up the cargo bike library. And within Manchester as well, there are internal uses for those bicycles within different council departments. And then across both schemes, we've got secondary beneficiaries that are receiving the bicycles because they've put a business case forward, essentially, that they would be able to reduce car journeys or van journeys, that type of thing. So lots of different funding pots. There isn't necessarily one. And I say it was just keeping an eye on what's out there. and potentially there is the opportunity to apply directly for small projects. We've had a number of little projects set up in sort of areas where they've applied for small pots of money to try something to get it off the ground, and then built off the back of that.
That's great, thank you. One for you, Ian, is RTFGM looking at cycle storage in residential spaces? I don't know if you know the answer to this.
Are we looking for cycle storage in residential? Sorry, it cut out.
I think, are RTFGM looking at cycle storage in residential spaces? I'd assume like the bike hangers and things like this, so using road space for storage.
It's not really something I would be able to comment on too much. I mean, if it was to do with the cycle hire scheme, we're working with private landlords for cycle hire stations, but I'm assuming that's not related to that question. So I'm probably not the best place to answer that one.
No, although an interesting follow-up would be, is there going to be any of the cycle hire stations using road space? Because that's quite a visual thing for people to see, the reallocation of kind of priorities.
Yes, we're considering all options to get the stations in different locations, and obviously where we're looking at taking up, for example, a parking space to put 8 docking stations. It's met with a lot of criticism, I'd say, and we've got a lot of challenges around that. So they're some of the difficult ones, but I think our interests are to get the stations in locations that make sense to people, so they're kind of located within sort of 300 to 500 meters of each other. Where they go, we want them to have the least visual impact. We want them to not be in the way, but we want them to be accessible and for people to be able to use them in a way that they want to.
That's great. And one for you, Patrick, is e-bikes sound great, but how can we minimize negative effects of e-bikes if we think about their role in shifting away from walking and cycling on a standard cycle, for example?
Yeah, that's a risk that the model shift that the e-bikes takes parts to walking and to cycling. But in the research we did in Lausanne and with Dimitri Marinchek, we interviewed people who bought an e-bike. We met also people that used to cycle or to walk a lot, or to cycle a lot. And at one point, the mechanical bike is not the solution anymore, because they move to another location. They have a new job, they have kids, or maybe they are not fit as before. So I think that this the model shift has to be seen also in over the long term in the life course. And someone who don't cycle a mechanical bike anymore, but use an e-bike, that's someone who could have shifted to a motorized vehicle. So it's not always so clear.
That's great. And one final question for all of you is, do you think that e-cycles are changing the landscape of cycling? So first to you, Chris.
I think, well, my hope is that they will. And one of the reasons I started the bike business was I was tired of like the cycle activism work that I was doing, not having a quick enough response, basically, to increase better cycle infrastructure and safer cycleways. And so one of my thoughts was that if I can help more people by sharing my knowledge and experience on how to cycle with families, children, cargo, then that would increase more cycle users. And I think the e-bike will create more cycle users. And then I think the knock-on effect of that is that there's going to be a bigger demand for better infrastructure.
That's great. And Ian, what do you think?
I think it has changed the landscape, and I think it's going to even more. I think it's blurring the lines a lot more with people who cycles and who doesn't. I think the sort of age-old caricatural cyclist is changing slightly. I'm seeing different people out on bikes. People that are choosing to commute to work aren't, lobbying cyclists. They're just, recreational cyclists that are moving towards cycling more. And I think the part of Patrick's sort of studies there of people over 60, whatever the sort of category you might be looking at, increasing the number of people in that category and them cycling is clear, and you can see that, that's out there in front of us all, really. So yes, I think it has changed, and it will change even more.
And Patrick?
Yes, because the e-bike extends the practice of cycling to other population groups, to other spaces. For example, spaces with a gradient where you couldn't find many cyclists before. Now it's reachable. It's feasible to go there. The e-bikes is also a way to increase the cargo function of cycling. So I think it, in terms of population group, uses, reasons to cycle, spaces, it brings something really, it has an important effect, I think.
That's great, thank you. And I think that's a really positive way to end our seminar as well. So thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today, I think, and thank you to our audience as well for asking those questions. I think it's been really interactive, and yeah, I've really enjoyed it myself. So our website's on the screen if you want to sign up to our seminar series, and then you get our email when we've got another seminar. But yeah, thanks again for everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.